The morning air still carried the coolness of night when she stepped off the old bus with a single worn bag resting against her shoulder. The town was already awake. Small shops were opening their doors, street vendors were arranging fresh fruit, and people hurried along the sidewalks with cups of hot tea in their hands. It looked like every other ordinary morning, but for her, it was the beginning of something she could not yet explain. She stood quietly for a moment near the bus stop and looked across the street at the building she had seen only in pictures. It was larger than she had imagined. The walls were made of old stone, strong and beautiful, touched by years of rain, sunlight, and stories. Tall windows reflected the early morning sky, and near the entrance hung a simple sign that had become known throughout the area. People came there to learn. Children came there with dreams. Teenagers came there hoping to become something special. Adults came there because some dreams never truly leave. And today she was walking toward it. Her shoes moved slowly across the street, her steps calm and steady. She didn't look nervous, though inside, her thoughts were louder than the traffic around her. She had traveled a long way to reach this place. More than distance, it had taken years of quiet decisions, hard work, sacrifice, and moments nobody else had seen. When she reached the front gate, she paused for only a second before pushing it open. Inside, the building felt alive. Soft sounds floated through the hallways. Some rooms carried laughter. Some carried quiet concentration. Others held the sound of practice. Small mistakes, repeated lessons, patient instructions, and hopeful effort. It was the sound of people trying. She listened for a moment almost without meaning to. Her face remained calm, but something gentle moved behind her eyes. A voice suddenly broke her thoughts. "You must be the new helper." She turned. A woman stood near the front desk holding a folder in one hand and a cup of tea in the other. Her voice wasn't rude, but it carried the busy tone of someone who had too much to do and too little time. She nodded politely. "Yes." The woman looked her up and down for only a second. Simple clothes. No jewelry. No expensive bag. Nothing that stood out. "Come with me." She followed without saying much. As they walked through the hallways, people passed them in both directions. Some carried books. Some carried instruments. Some carried notebooks full of handwritten notes. Nobody paid much attention to her, and that was fine. She had grown used to being unnoticed. The woman stopped near a small office and placed the folder on a desk. "Your work is simple," she said. "Organize papers. Clean practice rooms. Help students find what they need. Move chairs if necessary. Nothing difficult." She nodded again. "Understood." The woman looked almost surprised that she didn't ask questions. "Good. Most people ask too many." She gave a short smile. "I prefer learning by watching." For the first time, the woman looked at her a little longer, as if trying to understand something. Then she simply shrugged. "Well, you'll fit in." The day began immediately. Her first task was carrying stacks of music sheets from one room to another. Some were old and yellow at the edges. Others were freshly printed. She handled each page carefully, never rushing. A young student nearly bumped into her while running through the hallway. "Sorry." He didn't stop running. She smiled quietly and kept walking. In one room, a group of children practiced basic exercises. Their teacher clapped gently to keep rhythm. In another room, older students argued over notes and timing. Some were confident. Some were frustrated. Some looked ready to quit. She noticed all of it, but she said nothing. Hour after hour, she moved through the building quietly, helping where needed. She stacked chairs, wiped dust from shelves, organized books, carried instruments, replaced missing pencils, straightened music stands. Simple work, basic work, the kind of work people rarely notice. By afternoon, most staff had stopped paying attention to her completely. She had become part of the background, and still she didn't mind. Near the end of the day, she entered one of the older practice rooms. The room was empty. Sunlight spilled through half-open curtains, drawing long golden lines across the wooden floor. In the center of the room sat an instrument that clearly had many years behind it. Its surface carried small scratches. Its keys showed signs of thousands of hands. Its corners held the quiet dignity of something that had witnessed generations. She stood still. For a few seconds, she simply looked at it. No movement, no sound, no words. Then slowly, almost without thinking, her fingers brushed across the top as if greeting an old friend. Her touch was light, respectful, familiar. A voice suddenly came from the doorway. "You clean fast." She turned immediately. An older instructor stood there with crossed arms. She stepped away. "I was just finishing." The instructor walked into the room. Most helpers don't stop to admire old things. She lowered her eyes politely. Some old things deserve respect. The instructor studied her face for a moment, then gave a small nod. "True." Without another word, he walked away. She returned to work. But for some reason, his eyes stayed thoughtful. The next few days followed the same pattern. She arrived early, worked quietly, left late, never complained, never asked for praise, never tried to stand out. Yet little things began catching people's attention. She always remembered where missing papers belonged. She could organize shelves faster than anyone else. She seemed to know exactly which students needed encouragement, even without speaking much. And strangely, whenever something important went missing, she somehow found it. At first, people called it luck. Then they called it experience. But nobody asked deeper questions. One afternoon, while organizing materials outside a classroom, she heard two young students whispering. "She looks too quiet. Maybe she doesn't know much. She's just a helper." She kept working. No reaction. No hurt expression. No anger. Just quiet focus. A few minutes later, one of the students opened the classroom door too quickly, dropping an entire stack of sheets across the hallway. Pages flew everywhere. Both students froze. She knelt down immediately and began gathering them. The boys joined her. One of them looked embarrassed. "Sorry." She smiled. "Mistakes are part of learning." The boy looked surprised. Her voice carried no judgment, only understanding. When the papers were stacked again, she handed them back perfectly organized. The students looked at each other. Neither understood how she had sorted everything so quickly. That evening, as the building slowly emptied, she stayed behind to finish cleaning one final room. Outside, the sky turned orange. Inside, silence grew. She placed the last chair in its place and stood still for a moment. From somewhere deep in the building, a soft melody floated through the hallway. Someone was practicing. She closed her eyes for just a second, and for the first time since arriving, the smallest smile appeared on her face. Not because of the job, not because of the building, but because something she thought she had left behind was beginning to feel close again. She opened her eyes, picked up her bag, and quietly walked into the evening, unnoticed by almost everyone. Almost everyone. By the time her second week began, most people inside the building had stopped noticing when she arrived. She came before sunrise, just as the streets outside were beginning to wake. The security guard at the front gate no longer asked questions. He simply nodded when he saw her walking toward the entrance with the same worn bag resting against her shoulder. She always returned the nod with a quiet smile. Then she stepped inside and began working. Every morning followed a pattern. First, she opened the practice rooms. Then she arranged the chairs. She checked the shelves. She replaced missing pencils. She stacked books. She organized papers. She wiped dust from windows, tables, and music stands. Nothing dramatic. Nothing glamorous. Just small things that kept everything moving. And somehow, every task she touched looked better afterward. First, nobody thought much about it. Then people started noticing. A teacher entered one classroom and paused. The music sheets were arranged by lesson level. Colored folders were placed in perfect order. Broken pencils had been replaced. Even the old clock on the wall, which had stopped working weeks ago, was running again. He looked around the room with confusion. Who did this? No one answered, because nobody knew, or maybe nobody cared enough to ask. The day moved quickly as students filled the hallways. Some came with excitement. Some came with nervous energy. Some came because their parents pushed them. Others came because this place felt like home. She watched all of them while working. She noticed things most people missed. The student who smiled loudly but secretly feared mistakes. The one who acted confident but kept hiding shaky hands. The one who stayed after class pretending to practice, when really they were afraid to go home too early. She never asked questions. She simply noticed. And somehow people felt calmer around her. That morning, one of the younger students struggled with a simple rhythm exercise. The child kept missing the beat. Again, and again, and again. The instructor tried explaining, then demonstrated, then corrected, but frustration kept growing. Finally, the child pushed the papers away. I can't do it. The room became quiet. Other students looked down. The instructor sighed. Before anyone could speak, she quietly stepped closer. Not too close, just enough. She bent down beside the child and pointed gently at the page. Try slower. The child looked up. Slower. She nodded. Not perfect. Just slower. The child stared at her for a second. Then tried again. One beat. Then another. Then another. This time the rhythm stayed steady. The child's eyes widened. I did it. She smiled. Yes. The instructor stood silent for a moment, then cleared his throat. Good. But his eyes followed her long after she walked away. Later that afternoon, she carried a box of old files into the storage room near the back of the building. It was one of the oldest parts of the center. Few people went there unless they had to. The room smelled of paper, wood, and time. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with notebooks, records, old lesson plans, faded photographs, and forgotten equipment. She set the box down and began sorting through dusty folders. As she worked, someone entered behind her. You actually volunteered for storage? She turned. A teenage student stood in the doorway holding a notebook under one arm. He looked amused. Most people avoid this place. She gave a small smile. Quiet places help people think. He laughed softly. That's one way to see it. He stepped inside. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he pointed at one of the shelves. You know where the beginner theory books are? She looked once. Third shelf. Left side. Blue covers. He blinked. How did you know that? She shrugged. I organized them yesterday. He walked over, found them exactly where she said, then looked back at her with surprise. You remember all that? She returned to work. Sometimes. The student stayed quiet for a moment, then asked the question others had been thinking. Did you ever study here? She paused, only for a second, then continued sorting papers. No, somewhere else. She smiled faintly. A long time ago. Before he could ask more, she picked up another box. The conversation was over, but his curiosity had only grown. By the end of that week, whispers had started. Nothing serious, just small conversations in corners. She notices everything. She never makes mistakes. She knows where everything is. She's just a helper, right? Some laughed. Some shrugged. Some ignored it. But questions were growing, and she acted as if she heard none of it. One evening, the center stayed open later than usual. A local event was coming, and preparations filled every room. Students practiced longer. Teachers grew more serious. Schedules became tighter. Mistakes mattered more. The pressure could be felt in every hallway. She moved through it all quietly, helping, organizing, fixing small problems before they became big ones. Around sunset, one of the senior instructors stormed into the front office. His face looked tense. Where are the performance folders? Nobody answered immediately. Staff searched desks, drawers, cabinets. Nothing. The instructor's voice grew louder. We need them now. Panic spread quickly. Students waited. Teachers searched. Papers were moved. Boxes opened. Folders flipped. Still nothing. Then someone looked toward her. She stood near the shelves, holding a stack of notebooks. Have you seen them? Every eye turned. She thought for a second, then pointed calmly toward a cabinet near the hallway. Top shelf. behind the red binders. The instructor frowned. That's impossible. I already checked. She said nothing. He walked to the cabinet, opened it, moved the red binders, and froze. The folders were there, exactly where she said. Silence filled the office. Slowly he turned back. How did you know? She adjusted the notebooks in her arms. You placed them there yesterday. He stared. I don't remember that. She gave a polite smile. Sometimes people are busy. No one spoke. She simply walked away. That night the whispers became louder. She notices everything. She remembers everything. Who is she? But still, nobody had real answers. A few days later, during lunch break, several students gathered in one of the side rooms. Some were practicing. Some were talking. Some were eating snacks and avoiding homework. She entered quietly to replace a stack of missing papers. One of the students looked up. Can I ask you something? She paused. If it's quick. The room laughed softly. The student smiled. Do you know music? A few others looked up. Waiting. She looked at the pages in her hands. Then at them. A little. The students laughed. A little? How little? Like beginner level? She smiled but didn't answer. One of them pointed toward a music stand. Can you at least read this? He held up a sheet. A basic exercise. Simple notes. Easy timing. The room watched. She walked over. Looked at the page for only 2 seconds. Then nodded. Yes. Can you play it? She looked at the instrument in the corner. Then back at them. Instead of answering, she simply placed the papers on the table. Your break is almost over. Groans filled the room. You avoided the question. She smiled. Maybe. Then she walked out. Behind her, the students stared. She definitely knows something. Yeah. But what? That evening, as most people packed their things and prepared to leave, one older instructor stood alone in a hallway watching her organize chairs. His expression was thoughtful, careful, curious. He had taught for decades. He had seen talent. He had seen confidence. He had seen people pretending to know more than they did. But what he saw in her was different. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had spent years doing more than simple work. And for the first time, he started wondering if the quiet helper everyone overlooked wasn't a helper at all. The days leading up to the annual showcase changed the mood of the entire building. What had once felt calm and organized now felt faster, louder, and heavier. Hallways filled with hurried footsteps. Doors opened and closed every few seconds. Teachers moved from room to room carrying folders, schedules, and notes. Students practiced longer than usual, repeating the same pieces until their fingers felt tired and their minds felt full. The showcase happened only once a year. For some students, it was simply another performance. For others, it was everything. Parents would come. Special guests would come. Former students would return. Even people from other towns sometimes visited. For many young performers, this was the moment they waited for all year. And because of that, nobody wanted anything to go wrong. She noticed the pressure immediately. The building still looked the same. The same old walls. The same wooden floors. The same rooms filled with music. But now tension moved through every corner. Voices became sharper. Mistakes felt bigger. Small problems suddenly felt important. And through all of it, she remained exactly the same. She arrived early. She worked quietly. She spoke only when necessary. She fixed small problems before people even noticed them. Missing papers appeared where they were needed. Broken stands got repaired. Lost pencils somehow returned. Schedules that had disappeared were suddenly found. At this point, people had stopped asking how. They simply accepted it. If something was missing, they looked for her. If something felt out of place, they called for her. And somehow, she always knew what needed to be done. But while everyone trusted her with simple things, nobody truly knew who she was. That question still remained. One morning, the building felt more crowded than usual. The main performance hall was being prepared for rehearsal. Rows of chairs were arranged. Lights were tested. Microphones were checked. Decorations were carefully placed along the walls. Students moved in groups, whispering, stretching their fingers, reviewing notes. Some looked excited. Some looked terrified. She spent most of the morning helping set up, moving chairs, carrying boxes, organizing programs, making sure every music stand stood straight. She worked quietly, almost invisible among the crowd, until something unexpected happened. One of the senior students was practicing alone near the front of the stage. He had been chosen as one of the featured performers. Everyone expected him to do well. He had talent, confidence, years of training. But that morning, something felt off. He missed a note, then another, then stopped completely. He stared at the instrument in frustration. Again. He tried again, and again. Still wrong. His shoulders tightened. His breathing changed. The instructor standing nearby crossed his arms. Focus. The student nodded. Tried again. Failed again. More people started noticing. Whispers spread. She was arranging programs near the back of the hall when she looked up. Only for a moment. But that one glance told her everything. She could see it. Not in his hands. Not in the notes. Not in the instrument. In his face. He wasn't struggling with the music. He was struggling with fear. She kept working. Said nothing. The instructor walked closer. You know this piece. I know. Then why are you missing it? I don't know. His voice sounded tight. The room felt heavier. Other students pretended not to watch. But everyone was watching. Then suddenly the student stepped back. I need air. And before anyone could stop him, he walked off the stage. Silence followed. The instructor looked frustrated. This is not the time. She quietly placed the final program on the table. Then walked toward the hallway. Not toward the stage. Toward the student. She found him sitting alone near an open window. He looked embarrassed, annoyed, and tired. He didn't notice her at first. She stood nearby but said nothing. After a few seconds, he finally looked up. Oh! He gave a weak smile. The helper. She smiled softly. If that's easier to remember. He looked down. I messed up. She leaned lightly against the wall. No. He frowned. I missed half the piece. She shook her head. You forgot to breathe. He blinked. What? You weren't playing music. She paused. You were fighting your fear. He stared at her. For a moment he forgot to speak. How do you know that? She looked out the window. Because fear always looks the same. The student stayed silent. Her words didn't sound like a guess. They sounded like experience. She looked back at him. Close your eyes. He looked confused. What? Close them. He hesitated. Then did it. She spoke calmly. Don't think about the audience. Silence. Don't think about mistakes. Silence. Don't think about proving anything. His breathing slowly changed. Now. She smiled. Remember why you started. The student's shoulders relaxed. For a few seconds neither spoke. Then he opened his eyes. Something looked different. Calmer. Lighter. How did you? She pushed away from the wall. Your rehearsal is waiting. And just like that, she walked away, leaving him sitting there, staring after her. When he returned to the stage 15 minutes later, everything changed. His hands moved smoothly. His rhythm returned. The mistakes disappeared. By the end of the piece, even the instructor looked surprised. That's better. The student nodded. But his eyes didn't look at the instructor. They looked across the hall. Her. She was stacking chairs as if nothing had happened. Later that afternoon, whispers spread faster than ever. She helped him. How? She barely talks. Who is she? No one knew. But curiosity was becoming impossible to ignore. That evening, the senior instructors gathered in one of the offices to review the final showcase schedule. Papers covered the table. Performance times. Student names. Room assignments. Everything had to be perfect. One instructor tapped the schedule. Opening performance is set. Another nodded. Featured solo is ready. Then someone asked the question nobody wanted to hear. What if something goes wrong? Silence. It was always possible. Illness, nerves, mistakes, accidents, last-minute cancellations. Anything could happen. And then, as if fate had been listening, phone rang. One of the instructors answered. His expression changed instantly. What? The room went silent. He listened, said nothing, then slowly lowered the phone. Every face turned toward him. What happened? He looked at the schedule, then at everyone else. Our opening performer. He paused. Won't make it. Silence. Real silence. The kind that makes a room feel smaller. What? Tomorrow. That's impossible. Who replaces them? Nobody had an answer. The opening performance was one of the most important parts of the entire showcase. It set the mood. It set the standard. Without it, everything could feel wrong. Voices started overlapping. Ideas were thrown around. Names were suggested. Schedules were checked. Nothing worked. Nobody fit. Nobody was ready. Frustration filled the room. Then one of the younger instructors looked toward the hallway. Through the half-open door, she could be seen quietly carrying a box of programs. He stared for a moment, then smiled slightly, half joking, half serious. What about her? The room went quiet, then laughter. She's a helper. Exactly. We need a performer. He shrugged. I know. Then he leaned back in his chair, still smiling. But honestly, he looked toward the hallway again. I'm starting to wonder if that's really all she is. The morning of the showcase arrived faster than anyone expected. Before sunrise, lights were already on inside the building. Staff members moved through hallways carrying folders, decorations, cables, and cups of coffee that had long gone cold. Students arrived earlier than usual, some dressed neatly, some still practicing quietly under their breath, some pretending to look calm while their hands gave away the truth. Outside, cars slowly filled the parking area. Families stepped out dressed for a special day. Children carried flowers. Parents carried cameras. Grandparents walked carefully toward the entrance, smiling proudly before the first performance had even begun. Inside, the energy felt completely different. Excitement, pressure, hope, fear. Every emotion lived under that roof at the same time. And in the middle of all of it, she arrived exactly when she always did. Not early, not late, right on time. The same worn bag, the same calm walk, the same quiet smile for the security guard. Nothing about her looked different. But today, the building around her was anything but normal. As soon as she stepped inside, she noticed people whispering. Some looked nervous. Some looked confused. Some looked directly at her, then quickly looked away. She kept walking. A younger instructor rushed toward her. There you are. She stopped. Good morning. The instructor looked too stressed to answer the greeting. Can you come with me? She studied his face for a second. Something was wrong. She nodded. Without asking questions, she followed him down the hallway. They passed students warming up, parents finding seats, staff checking schedules. Nobody paid attention to them until he opened the door to the main office. Inside, every senior instructor was already there. No one was smiling. Folders covered the table. Schedules were spread out. Coffee cups sat untouched. And every face in the room turned toward her the second she walked in. She stopped near the door. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the oldest instructor finally cleared his throat. We have a problem. She waited quietly. Our opening performer will not be here. She nodded once. I heard. Several instructors exchanged surprised looks. How did you hear? She gave a small smile. People speak loudly when they're worried. No one laughed. The tension was too real. The oldest instructor leaned forward. We need someone. She said nothing. Another instructor crossed his arms. Not for the full showcase. He paused. Just for the opening. Another added quickly. Something simple. Something clean. Something basic. 5 minutes. Enough to buy time. She listened carefully. Still no reaction. Then the younger instructor who had brought her there finally said what everyone had been thinking. We want you to help. Silence. Even the clock on the wall suddenly sounded louder. Tick, tick, tick. She looked around the room, at the worried faces, at the schedules, at the pressure sitting on every shoulder. Then she asked one simple question. What exactly do you want me to do? The oldest instructor answered carefully. There's a beginner piece. He slid a sheet across the table. Simple. Safe. No risk. We just need someone who won't panic. She looked down at the paper. The notes were clean. Easy. The kind of exercise young students learned early. Nothing complicated. Nothing memorable. Just enough to fill silence. She looked at the paper for only a few seconds, then looked back up. I understand. One instructor looked relieved. Another still looked unsure. And one of them couldn't hide his doubt. Can you actually play? The room became quiet again. She looked at him calmly, then smiled. A little. A few instructors exchanged glances. Nobody knew whether to feel reassured or terrified. The oldest instructor stood up. Good. He looked at the clock. You perform in 30 minutes. She nodded once, then quietly picked up the sheet and left the office. As soon as the door closed, the room exploded with whispers. Are we seriously doing this? We don't have another choice. What if she freezes? What if she can't play? What if? The oldest instructor raised his hand. We're already out of options. Silence returned. Meanwhile, she walked calmly through the hallway as if nothing unusual had happened. Students rushed past her. Parents filled the seats. Volunteers checked tickets. Lights warmed the stage. And she walked as calmly as she always had. One student noticed her carrying the sheet. The helper. Another looked confused. Why does she have performance music? Whispers started spreading. And within minutes, half the building knew. The quiet helper was about to perform. Backstage, the air felt warmer. More crowded. More nervous. Performers stretched their fingers. Reviewed their notes. Practiced silent movements. She found an empty chair near the corner and sat down. The paper rested quietly in her hands. She looked at it once, then folded it, and placed it beside her. She closed her eyes. Not to practice, not to memorize, just to breathe. A young student approached her carefully. It was the same one she had helped earlier in the week. He looked nervous. Are you really opening the showcase? She opened her eyes. Yes. He hesitated. Are you scared? She smiled softly. Always. He looked surprised. Then how do you do it? She looked toward the stage curtains, at the bright lights beyond them, at the audience slowly filling every seat. Then she answered quietly. You stop trying to impress people. The student frowned. Then what? She smiled. You tell the truth. Before he could ask what that meant, a voice called from backstage. Opening performer. The room became still. Everyone looked at her. Students, teachers, volunteers, even people who had ignored her for weeks. She stood, picked up the folded paper, adjusted nothing, said nothing, and walked toward the stage. The curtains waited. The bright lights waited. And beyond them, hundreds of eyes. The announcer stepped forward, smiled at the audience, and spoke into the microphone. Thank you all for joining us for this year's annual showcase. Applause filled the hall. He continued. We begin today with a special opening performance. Another round of applause. Then, her name was never announced, because most people still didn't know it. The announcer simply stepped aside, and she walked onto the stage. First, the audience barely reacted. Some kept talking. Some checked phones. Some adjusted cameras. Some smiled politely, expecting nothing special. After all, she looked ordinary. Simple clothes. Calm expression. No dramatic entrance. No spotlight confidence. Just a quiet woman walking toward an old instrument. But inside the building, the people who knew her froze. Students leaned forward. Teachers stopped breathing. Staff members forgot what they were doing. Even the instructors backstage stood completely still. She reached the instrument, placed the folded paper beside her. Then, did something nobody expected. She never opened it. One instructor backstage whispered, "She didn't even look." Another answered quietly, "She doesn't need it." She sat down slowly, placed her hands above the keys, and for one long moment, she didn't move. The audience grew quieter, then completely silent. Her fingers hovered, still, steady, certain, and in that exact moment, every person in the room suddenly felt it. Something was about to happen, and whatever came next was not going to be basic. For one long moment, nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Nobody checked their phones. Nobody adjusted their cameras. Hundreds of eyes stayed fixed on the stage. Her hands rested above the keys, calm and steady, as if the noise of the world had completely disappeared. Even backstage, the instructors stood frozen. Students leaned forward. Staff members stopped walking. The entire building seemed to hold its breath. Then, her fingers touched the keys. The first notes were soft, simple, exactly what everyone expected. A basic melody. Clean, careful, safe. Several instructors quietly nodded. A few parents smiled politely. Some audience members relaxed in their seats. Good. Simple. Nothing risky. Nothing surprising. Exactly what the organizers had hoped for, or so they thought. She played the first few lines exactly as written. Steady, precise, controlled. The kind of exercise beginner students practiced every week. And then, something changed. It happened so naturally that some people didn't notice it at first. A small change in rhythm. A slightly deeper tone. A touch of emotion hidden inside a simple phrase. Then another. And another. By the time people realized what was happening, she was no longer playing the exercise. She was telling a story. Her hands moved with quiet confidence. Not fast. Not flashy. Not dramatic. Just certain. Every note sounded alive. Every pause meant something. Every transition felt like memory. The simple melody began to grow. Soft notes became fuller. Warm tones became stronger. The rhythm became deeper. The room changed with it. Parents stopped smiling politely and started listening carefully. Children stopped fidgeting. Students forgot their own performances waiting backstage. Even the instructors looked at one another in complete disbelief. One of them whispered without realizing it, "That's impossible." Another shook his head. "No." He stared at the stage. "That's training." The oldest instructor didn't speak at all. He simply watched. And the longer he watched, the more his expression changed. From curiosity, to surprise, to something much deeper. Recognition. Backstage, one of the senior students whispered to another, "She never even looked at the paper." The other student nodded slowly. "She never needed it." On stage, she continued. The piece no longer sounded like practice. It no longer sounded like an opening performance. It sounded personal. Like every note carried years. Years of discipline. Years of silence. Years of things never spoken. And somehow, even people who knew nothing about music could feel it. An older man in the front row slowly lowered his camera. A mother stopped adjusting her child's collar. A young student backstage felt tears forming without understanding why. No one spoke. No one wanted to break whatever was happening. Her hands moved across the keys with the kind of control that couldn't be taught in a few lessons. Couldn't even be taught in years. Came from somewhere deeper. Something built through sacrifice, through struggle, through love, and through loss. The instructors knew it. They could hear it. This wasn't talent. Talent could impress. This was experience. And experience always sounded different. Near the back of the hall, the younger instructor who had joked about letting her perform slowly shook his head. "I was kidding." Another instructor answered quietly, "I don't think she ever was." Minutes passed, but nobody noticed. Time felt different inside that room. The music kept growing. Not louder, not faster, just deeper. And then came the moment that changed everything. Her hands moved into a section no beginner should have known. No helper, no casual player, no ordinary performer. Not even most advanced students in that building could play what came next. One instructor leaned forward so quickly his chair nearly tipped. That piece. Another finished his sentence. I know it. The oldest instructor finally spoke. His voice barely above a whisper. She wrote that transition herself. Silence. The younger instructors looked at him. What? He didn't take his eyes off the stage. I heard that arrangement years ago. He swallowed slowly. At a national performance. Nobody spoke. Because suddenly, the question wasn't who she was. The question was, how had nobody recognized her sooner? The final section approached. The audience could feel it. Even people with no musical background could sense the ending building. Her hands slowed, then rose, then fell again. Soft, gentle, almost like goodbye. And with one final note, the hall fell completely silent. Not polite silence. Not confused silence. Real silence. The kind that happens when people are too moved to remember how to react. She kept her hands resting lightly on the keys. Her breathing remained calm. Her face remained peaceful. As if nothing unusual had happened. As if she had simply done her job. 1 second passed. Then 2. Then 3. No one moved. Then suddenly, one person stood. An older man in the 3rd row. He began clapping. Slowly. Firmly. Then another stood. Then another. Then another. And within seconds, the entire hall was on its feet. Applause exploded through the building. Louder than anyone expected. Parents. Students. Teachers. Guests. Everyone. Some clapped. Some cheered. Some simply stood there with tears in their eyes. Backstage, several students looked completely stunned. One whispered, "That was her." Another shook his head. "No." He smiled. "That's who she's always been." She stood slowly from the instrument. She didn't bow dramatically, didn't wave, didn't smile for attention. She simply gave one small nod, then walked off the stage as calmly as she had walked onto it. The applause followed her all the way behind the curtains. But the second she stepped backstage, silence returned. Not because people stopped clapping, because everyone standing there was speechless. Students moved aside without being asked. Instructors stared. Volunteers forgot what they were holding. Nobody knew what to say, until finally, the oldest instructor stepped forward. His eyes looked different now. No longer curious, no longer doubtful, only certain. He looked at her carefully, then asked one quiet question. "Is it really you?" For the first time since arriving at the center, her calm expression changed. Only slightly. A small smile. Not proud. Not defensive. Just honest. She looked at him and nodded. Yes. The instructor closed his eyes for a second, as if remembering something from long ago, then opened them again. His voice sounded almost emotional. "I saw you perform 15 years ago." The people around them froze. 15 years? Students looked at one another. Volunteers stared. Even the younger instructors looked shocked. One of them spoke. "You knew her?" The older man nodded slowly. "I didn't just know her." He looked back at her, his voice full of respect. "Back then," he smiled softly, "she was the performer everyone wanted to become." No one moved. No one spoke. Because in that moment, the quiet helper they had ignored, the woman who organized chairs, found missing papers, fixed broken clocks, and arrived before sunrise every day, was no longer a mystery. She wasn't someone learning. She wasn't someone starting over. She wasn't someone who knew a little. She was someone who had once stood at the very top, and somehow had quietly walked back into the world, without telling anyone who she really was. For several seconds after the older instructor spoke, nobody moved. The applause from the main hall was still echoing through the building. But backstage, everything felt strangely quiet. Students stood frozen. Teachers stared. Volunteers looked at one another as if they had all heard the same unbelievable secret at the same exact time. And in the center of all that silence, she simply stood there, calm, breathing normally. No pride, no dramatic reaction, No need to explain herself. The older instructor looked at her with the kind of respect people only show when memory and reality suddenly become the same. "I knew it," he said softly. His voice carried years. "I knew I had seen those hands before." She smiled gently. "It's been a long time." One of the younger instructors finally found his voice. "A long time." He looked completely lost. "You performed on national stages." Another instructor looked shocked. "You had recordings." One of the students stepped closer. "People studied your arrangements." A volunteer whispered, "My father used to talk about you." The room felt smaller with every sentence. And still, she remained quiet, not because she was hiding, because she never thought any of it mattered anymore. The older instructor looked around at everyone, then back at her. Why? That one word carried every question in the room. Why hide? Why work here? Why clean practice rooms? Why organize papers? Why let people assume you knew almost nothing? Why say nothing? For the first time, her eyes softened in a different way. Not with mystery, not with distance, with honesty. She looked at the students first, then at the teachers, then at the older instructor, and finally she spoke. Because life changes. No one interrupted. No one even blinked. She continued quietly. There was a time when music was everything. Her voice was calm, steady, but every word felt personal. I traveled. I performed. I won things. I stood under lights. She looked toward the stage where applause still echoed faintly through the walls. And people clapped. The younger students listened without moving. Some of them looked as if they were hearing the truth about dreams for the first time. She smiled softly. But applause doesn't stay. Silence. She looked down at her hands. Hands that had just left an entire hall speechless. Hands that had once built a name. Hands that had quietly carried boxes, cleaned rooms, and fixed broken clocks. My family needed me. Her words were simple. No drama. No self-pity. Just truth. Someone got sick. She paused. Then someone else. The room stayed completely silent. I thought I would leave the stage for a few months. A small smile touched her face. Months became years. Some students lowered their eyes. Some instructors folded their arms quietly. Not from discomfort, from respect. She looked up again. I worked wherever I could. Teaching, helping, cleaning, organizing. Whatever paid the bills. The younger instructor who had once doubted her looked ashamed. She noticed, and smiled at him gently. There's no shame in honest work. His eyes dropped. She wasn't blaming anyone. That somehow made it harder. The older instructor stepped closer. You could have come back any time. She nodded. Yes. He frowned. Then why didn't you? For the first time, she looked toward the stage curtains. Toward the bright lights, toward the world she once belonged to. Then she answered. Because for a while. She paused. I forgot why I started. The students looked confused. She noticed, so she smiled and explained. When you're young, you think music is about winning, about applause, about being seen. She looked around at all of them, then placed one hand gently over her heart. But the real reason, her voice softened, is here. Silence filled the room, the kind of silence that teaches more than any lesson. At that exact moment, the announcer's voice came through the hall. Please welcome our next performers. The showcase was continuing. The world was moving. But backstage, something bigger than a performance was happening. One of the youngest students stepped forward. The same child who had once said, I can't do it. His eyes looked brighter than before. Did you really stop playing? She looked at him, then smiled. Never. He looked confused. But you said you left. She knelt down so they were eye level. I left stages. She tapped gently on the old instrument beside them. Not music. The child smiled. And somehow, so did everyone else. A few minutes later, the older instructor cleared his throat. He looked more serious now. We need to talk. She stood. He pointed toward the office. She nodded. Inside, the same instructors who had once offered her a beginner piece now sat around the same table. Only now, no one doubted her. The oldest instructor folded his hands. "We would like to make you an offer." She stayed quiet. Another instructor smiled. "Not as a helper." A third added. "Not as support staff." The younger instructor smiled awkwardly. "Definitely not as someone who knows a little." The room laughed. Even she smiled. The oldest instructor leaned forward. "We want you here." He paused. "As a mentor. As a teacher. As someone these students can learn from." Silence followed. Not uncomfortable silence. Hopeful silence. She looked at every face in the room. Faces that had judged her, ignored her, questioned her, and now respected her. She thought for a long moment, then smiled. "I'll accept." The room broke into smiles immediately. But before anyone could celebrate, she raised one finger. "One condition." The instructors looked curious. "What is it?" She smiled softly. "I keep my morning duties." Silence. Then confusion. "What?" She nodded. "I still open the practice rooms. I still organize the papers. I still help where help is needed." The younger instructor blinked. "But why?" She looked at him, and answered with the same calm truth she had carried since the day she arrived. "Because talent may open doors." She paused. "But humility keeps them open." No one argued. No one needed to. Word about her performance spread faster than anyone expected. By evening, clips were already being shared. Parents talked. Guests asked questions. Former students sent messages. People from other towns began calling the center. Some wanted interviews. Some wanted lessons. Some simply wanted to know if the story was true. But inside the building, none of that mattered as much as what happened next. The following morning, before sunrise, the security guard at the front gate looked up, and there she was, the same worn bag, the same calm walk, the same quiet smile. He looked confused. "You're back." She smiled. "Of course." He laughed softly. "After yesterday." She nodded. "Especially after yesterday." Then she walked through the gate. Not as a mystery, not as a helper, not as a forgotten star, but as someone who had finally remembered who she truly was. And from that day on, whenever new students entered that building, they always heard the same story. Not about the woman who shocked everyone. Not about the performer who returned. Not about the legend nobody recognized. No, they heard something much simpler. They heard about the quiet woman who never needed people to believe in her because she never stopped believing in herself.